Forgive Me Father 2 is out of early access and it's verified on Steam Deck, same with Forgive Me Father 1. Forgive Me Father 1 is UE4 and believe it or not, Forgive Me Father 2 is a UE5 game thanks to Fulqrum running a code of both of them. So when it comes to graphics settings for this one, 800p, I'm going to lock it to 60 right now. Maybe to 90 because we're on the OLED. If you're on the LCD, lock it to 60, FOV 90 degrees. Then when it comes to graphics, this might disappoint some of you. I'm using medium to low settings on the foliage, especially. When it comes to draw distance, also on medium, and grain, I'm not a huge fan. And I also unplugged the charger so you guys can see what to expect. As you can see, it drops below 90, so this is probably, in my opinion, a 60 FPS game, even on the OLED, which is a bit disappointing. When I see a boomer shooter that has sprites and all that, despite being 3D and UE4, I don't know, I just expect better performance and more battery life. So personally, especially when enemies show up, it's going to drop pretty hard. If you're targeting 90, of course. But in my opinion, this game is an absolute banger. Personally, I like the second one way more. But as more enemies show up and fill out the screen, you're going to see it drops below the 90 FPS range. So if you're on the OLED, I highly recommend you play this at 60. So let's do that. Okay, so now a hard limit to 60. We apply it. And when it comes to graphics, the resolution scale, let's put it at 90%. But again, this is for a stress test scenario. Other levels actually run much better than this. This is a part when there's a lot of enemies. And as you can see, the GPU is completely maxed out. So it's a pretty demanding game, considering, again, the visuals, in my opinion. But I really like the art style of this one. Another negative that I have to mention is that controller support, while it's there, is not really amazing. It feels like you're emulating a mouse with an analog stick. You can adjust that from the Steam input, so it tries to be like emulate a stick more correctly, but it's hard to aim on this one, this controller. Maybe it's just me that I'm not really great at aiming with controllers. But again, in my opinion, this one is a banger. Just look into 60, expect 3 hours of battery on the OLED on a full charge. And on the LCD, I'll probably expect more like 1.5 to 2 hours, probably. On Forgive Me Father 2, this just released from early access, and we have very similar settings, but now it's Unreal Engine 5, so I was a little bit skeptical on performance on this one, so I lowered basically everything to medium and effects to low, so there won't be screen space reflections, which I don't think is a huge loss. And I kept FSR on quality. First I was like targeting 90 FPS, but in this level, that is, it has quite a few enemies, it's going to drop pretty hard when it comes to the frame rate targeting 90. So my advice is to just lock it to 60. So let's enable the frame rate limit. And if you're on the Steam Deck LCD, without a doubt, lock it to 60, just for, again, performance reasons. This game looks great. It's so much better than the original, in my opinion. At least when it comes to visuals, I think they did a way better job. It's way more realized. It feels like Forgive Me Father 1.5 actually. But as you can see, despite all those sacrifices in resolution and settings, we still dropped into the 50s. But again, visually, I think the game is super interesting. It just feels a little bit disappointing that a game that actually has a lot of sprite work in a 3D world. So despite being verified, by default it's on high settings, and I recommend you avoid high settings and just play it like this on medium settings with low effects. It removes the reflections on the ground, which I think is okay. whatever. When a game like this is not really completely undesirable, I would say. But again, I was expecting in a game like this 60 FPS, especially this level is especially demanding. As you can see, it drops into the 30s. So I don't know, I'm very disappointed with the performance in certain places, such as this one. It seems to be like the fog rendering or something. So in cases like this, you probably want to lower FSR to performance. Which again, visually the game still looks good enough, it retains the art style. But it just drops too hard. Which again is a shame, because this is like an ideal Steam Deck game, in my opinion. And the battery life will be pretty low, all things considered. When it comes to performance, it's very variable depending on the level. Here's another level when it drops into the 60s. So it's between 30 and 60, basically, depending on what's going on. The shipyard, for some reason, drops insanely hard in comparison to the other levels. So I get it's verified because it's 30 FPS in those bad moments. But by default I would say just put it on quality FSR on medium settings with low effects and you should be good. But again, drops hard in the shipyard and when many enemies are on screen. So maybe consider a 45 FPS gap instead. I really do enjoy the game, but it has that issue that I think is really important. Maybe again, with a controller you don't feel much of a problem. Talking about controller, it has full controller support. Much better support than the original. The first game, again, feels like an emulated mouse on a stick. Here, not so much. Here it actually feels much better. I was pretty surprised when I picked it up. It feels like a normal FPS on a controller, which is good. It also has some moments where you get a picture-in-picture effect that will show up to show you where to go next, like right now. And that hard locks the game at 40 sometimes, but once that camera is gone, it goes back up on performance. It happens pretty often. So yeah. What do I think about Forgive Me Father, the first and the second? Well, the first one is way cheaper, usually. This is like a $25 game, as far as I remember. It got discounted to $21 at some point. And honestly, despite the first one hitting 60s more consistently, I think the second one is superior in any way. I don't think you need to play the first one, personally. It feels like a much inferior product, which makes sense. This is an iterative work. And again, the second one visually is way better. It looks more like a comic book than the first one. Unfortunately, performance, as you can see here, is worse than the first one, because it's UE5. I don't know why they decided to go that route. But the game is great. Personally, I'll probably lock it to 45, just to avoid those big drops when there are many enemies on screen. But if you're fine with a variable frame rate from 40 to 60, you should be good. Around 2.5 hours of battery on a full charge on an OLED Steam Deck, and on an LCD is probably 90 to 100 minutes of battery. But again, this game is fantastic, the second one, again. While the first one is okay, this one feels more fully realized, and it just left early access, so you should have more content. So that's basically it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Again, a great game. I highly recommend you play it. Unfortunately, performance, at least in my opinion, leaves a lot to be desired, all things considered. But when it comes to art, the game is top-notch. They really nailed it, in my opinion. It looks fantastic. And the sprite work is very good. Instead of a single sprite like in the previous game, now it changes the sprite depending on the angle you're watching the enemies or certain models from. And again, it's a UE5 game, so I kind of understand the performance, but I wish, I don't know, that it could hold at least 60s on the Steam Deck with decent battery life. The GPU usage is just way too high, and we still need to use upscaling. But other than that, I really like this game and I highly recommend it. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Again, thanks to the publisher for providing a code of the game. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys, thanks for watching.